You ever notice how nobody tells you the real rules? Oh, they give you the obvious ones. Work hard, stay in line, be patient. Cute, but the real rules? The ones that actually control everything? They keep those buried, hidden behind fear, expectations, and obedience. And the moment you accidentally break one, not on purpose, not out of rebellion, just by being different, everything shifts. People look at you differently. Systems start glitching around you. Doors you weren't supposed to see start opening. That's when it hits you. You didn't break the rule. You exposed it. You ever feel like you're following something, but no one ever actually told you what it is? That's the game, not the loud rules. Not the ones written on walls or shouted in classrooms. Those are just decorations, distractions to make you think everything is fair, everything is visible. The real rules, they live in silence. In expectations nobody explains, but everyone somehow obeys. From the moment you start understanding the world, you're being trained. Not taught, trained. Trained to read reactions, to adjust yourself, to avoid that subtle shift in someone's face when you step out of line. Nobody sits you down and says, hey, don't think too differently, or don't question too much. No. They just reward you when you fit in and punish you when you don't. Smile when you comply. Distance when you don't. And slowly, without realizing it, you learn the rules. Don't speak too boldly. Don't challenge authority too directly. Don't outgrow the people around you too fast. Don't succeed in a way that makes others uncomfortable. Funny thing is, nobody ever said these out loud, but you felt them. You adapted to them. You shaped yourself around them like water trapped in a glass that was never meant for you. Because the system doesn't need to explain the rules. It just needs you to fear breaking them. And fear is efficient. It keeps you second-guessing your instincts. It makes you hesitate when you're about to say something real. It convinces you to shrink in moments where you should expand. You start editing yourself before the world even gets a chance to react. That's how deep it goes. You become both the prisoner and the guard. But here's where it gets interesting. The moment you step outside one of these invisible boundaries by accident or intention, you notice something strange. The world doesn't collapse. The sky doesn't fall. Instead, people react. Not with clarity, but with discomfort. Confusion. Sometimes even quiet hostility. Why? Because you didn't just break a rule. You revealed it. And people hate that. They don't hate the action as much as they hate the exposure. Because now they're forced to confront something they've been obeying blindly their whole lives. You become a mirror they didn't ask for, a disruption they can't easily ignore. So they label you. Too much. Too intense. Too different. But those labels, they're defense mechanisms. A way to push you back into the box without ever admitting the box exists. See, unspoken rules are powerful because they feel natural. Like they're just the way things are. But the truth is, they're designed, maintained, reinforced by people who benefit from you not questioning them. Because the moment you start asking, why? The moment you stop adjusting yourself automatically. The moment you act based on your own understanding instead of inherited limits, you begin to see the cracks. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. You start noticing how many decisions you made weren't really yours. How many opportunities you avoided because something invisible told you it wasn't safe or appropriate. How often you held back not because you lacked ability, but because you were following a script you never agreed to. That's the trap. Not chains, not walls, just silence, and your willingness to obey it. You think you're making your own choices, but look closer. Patterns. That's what they want from you. Predictable patterns. Reactions they can anticipate. Decisions that fit neatly into what's already been seen, already been controlled. Because when you're predictable, you're manageable. And when you're manageable, you're harmless. It starts small. They reward consistency, but not the kind that builds power, the kind that builds routine. Wake up, follow the script, stay in your lane. Do what's expected, say what's acceptable, think just enough to function, but not enough to disrupt. And every time you do it right, You get a little validation, a little approval, just enough to keep you locked in. And when you don't, that's when the shift happens. The tone changes. The energy around you tightens. Suddenly you're confusing, difficult, maybe even problematic. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did something unexpected. You stepped outside the version of you they had already memorized. See, people don't just get comfortable with who you are. They get comfortable with who you've been. And the moment you break that pattern, it unsettles them. Because predictability gives people a sense of control. If they know how you'll react, they know how to deal with you. They know how to position themselves around you. They know where you fit in the hierarchy they've built in their minds. But the second you become unpredictable, that control slips. And that's where the pressure comes in. Subtle at first. Little comments. Why are you acting different? You've changed. That's not like you. It sounds harmless. But it's not. It's correction. A quiet attempt to pull you back into the version of yourself that made everyone else comfortable. Because your unpredictability forces people to adapt. And most people don't want to adapt. They want you to stay the same. So they can stay the same. That's why the conditioning is so effective. It doesn't feel like control, it feels like belonging. Like stability. Like you're doing the right thing. But in reality, you're just repeating a version of yourself that was accepted once, and now you're afraid to outgrow it. You start anticipating reactions before they happen. You think, if I do this, how will they see me? If I say this, will it change things? And just like that, you edit yourself. You smooth out the edges. You remove the parts that feel risky, uncertain, new. You become consistent, reliable, predictable. And slowly, you disappear into that version. But here's the truth nobody likes to admit. Growth is unpredictable. Real change doesn't follow a pattern. It disrupts it. It breaks rhythm. It creates moments where people can't quite place you anymore. And that's uncomfortable not just for them, but for you too. Because stepping outside the pattern means stepping into uncertainty. No script. No guarantee. No familiar reaction to lean on. Just you, raw and unfiltered. And that's exactly why most people avoid it. They'd rather be understood than be free. Rather be accepted than be real. So they stay predictable. They stay safe. They stay within the lines that were never clearly drawn but always strongly enforced. But the moment you stop playing that role, the moment you allow yourself to act in ways that don't fit the expectation, everything shifts. People hesitate around you. They can't quite figure you out anymore. And in that hesitation, there's power. Because unpredictability breaks control. It forces the world to respond to you as you are now, not who you used to be. And that's where the conditioning starts to lose its grip. Not when you fight it loudly, but when you quietly refuse to repeat it the moment you stop moving like everyone expects. Something shifts in the room. It's subtle at first. A pause in conversation. A look that lingers a second too long. An energy that wasn't there before. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't cause a scene. You just did something different. Something that didn't match the version of you they had already accepted. And that's all it takes. Because people don't just rely on patterns for comfort, they depend on them for stability. Your behavior becomes part of their mental map. They know how to approach you, how far they can go, what to expect in return. It makes their world easier to navigate. Predictable. So when you break that pattern, you don't just change your behavior. You disrupt their sense of control. And control, when threatened, doesn't respond with curiosity. It responds with fear. Not loud, obvious fear. Not panic or chaos. No. It's quieter than that. It hides behind concern, criticism, even humor. It shows up as questions that aren't really questions. Are you okay? What's going on with you? Why are you acting like this? It sounds like care, but underneath it, there's discomfort. Because now they can't read you the same way. You've become unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things make people uneasy. Think about it. When someone suddenly steps outside their usual role, it forces everyone else to reassess their own. If you stop agreeing, they have to confront why they needed your agreement. If you stop staying quiet, they have to deal with what your silence used to hide. If you stop playing small, they're faced with the size of their own limitations. That's where the fear deepens. Because your change isn't just about you anymore. It reflects back on them. It challenges the structure they've built their identity around, the roles they've accepted, the limits they've never questioned. And most people would rather protect that structure than examine it. So they react, sometimes by pulling away, sometimes by pushing back, sometimes by trying to shrink you back into who you were. Not because they hate you, but because your growth makes them feel unstable. And instability feels like danger, even if nothing is actually wrong. That's the illusion. Your evolution gets interpreted as a threat, not because it harms anyone, but because it breaks the illusion of consistency. The illusion that everything is fixed, understood, under control. And when that illusion cracks, people don't always know how to respond. So they label you. Too unpredictable, too intense, too much to handle. But those labels aren't definitions. They're defenses. A way to create distance between them and the discomfort you triggered. A way to avoid asking the deeper question, why does this bother me so much? Because if they ask that honestly, they might realize it's not about you at all. It's about what your change represents. Freedom. And freedom to someone who's been living inside invisible boundaries feels terrifying, not inspiring, not exciting, terrifying. Because it removes the excuse of limitation. It exposes the fact that the rules they've been following might not be as solid as they believed, that they could step outside too, but they haven't. And that realization, it's heavy. So instead of stepping forward, they try to pull you back into predictability, back into comfort, back into the version of yourself that didn't challenge anything. But once you've broken the pattern, you feel the difference. You feel what it's like to act without that invisible script guiding you, to respond instead of react, to choose instead of repeat. And even if the reactions around you get colder, even if the distance grows, even if the energy shifts in ways you didn't expect, you understand something now that you didn't before. The fear you see in others. It was never about what you did. It was about what you revealed. Most people won't admit it, but a large part of their life is built around one quiet question. Will they approve of this? It sits behind decisions, words, timing, even silence. You start to measure yourself through reactions, how people respond, how they look at you, how quickly they validate what you do. And without realizing it, approval becomes a currency, something you chase, protect, and depend on. At first, it feels harmless. You adjust a little here, soften. Something there. You hold back a thought because it might sound too much. You say yes when you mean maybe, or maybe when you mean no. It seems small, almost invisible. But over time, those small adjustments stack up. They form a version of you that fits perfectly into other people's expectations and slowly drifts away from who you actually are. Because approval has a condition attached to it. It only comes when you stay within certain boundaries. Act a certain way. Speak in a tone that doesn't challenge too much. Grow, but not in a way that makes others uncomfortable. Shine, but not so bright that it shifts attention. And the moment you cross that invisible line, the approval fades. That's when things get real. Because now you're faced with a choice. Not a loud, obvious one, but a quiet internal split. Do you go back to what made people comfortable? Or do you keep moving forward even if it means standing alone for a while? Most people turn back, not because they're weak, but because approval feels safe. It gives you a sense of belonging, a sense that you're doing something right. It removes friction. It keeps relationships smooth, predictable. And stepping away from that, it feels like stepping into uncertainty. You start wondering, what if they see me differently now? What if I lose connection? What if I'm wrong? And just like that, you hesitate. You shrink your voice. You adjust your actions. You return to the version of yourself that gets the nod, the smile, the quiet acceptance. But here's what nobody tells you. That version of you comes at a cost. Every time you trade honesty for approval, you lose a little clarity. Every time you silence something real just to keep things smooth, You create distance between who you are and who you show. And over time, that distance grows so wide that even you forget what's real anymore. You're accepted, but you're not free. Because freedom doesn't exist in a space where you're constantly being evaluated. It can't grow. Where your decisions are filtered through other people's comfort. It can't breathe when every move you make is tied to how it will be received. Freedom begins the moment that filter breaks. The moment you stop asking for silent permission. The moment you say what needs to be said, even if it changes how you're perceived. The moment you take action without waiting for validation. The moment you accept that not everyone will understand, agree, or stay. That's when something shifts. Not around you, but inside you. The noise quiets down. The constant need to check, to measure, to adjust, it fades. And in its place, there's clarity. A sense of direction that doesn't depend on reaction. A confidence that isn't built on applause. It doesn't mean everything becomes easy. In fact, it often gets harder at first. Some people pull back. Some connections change. Some doors close quietly without explanation. And for a moment it can feel like you made the wrong move. But look closer. What you lost was conditional. What you gained is real. Because now when you act, it comes from you, not from expectation. When you speak, it carries weight not because it's approved, but because it's honest. And when you move forward, you're not dragging the invisible weight of everyone else's opinion behind you. That's freedom, not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet, solid knowing that you're no longer negotiating your identity just to keep things comfortable around you. Look closely at how everything around you is structured. Not the surface, but the mechanics underneath. It all runs on one quiet assumption that you won't question it. Not deeply, not consistently. Not in a way that forces anything to change. You can complain a little, joke about it, even criticize parts of it. That's allowed. In fact, that's part of the design. It gives the illusion of awareness, of freedom. But real questioning, the kind that disrupts patterns, that challenges foundations, that's where things get uncomfortable. Because the system, whatever form it takes in your life, depends on repetition. Predictable actions, expected reactions, familiar cycles. It's not built to handle too much deviation. It doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to keep moving. And the easiest way to keep it moving is if the people inside it follow along without thinking too much. Not because they're incapable, but because they've been trained to trust the structure more than their own perception. You're told what success looks like before you even understand what you want. You're shown the path, the milestones, the right timing for everything. And if you follow it step by step, you're rewarded. Maybe not instantly, maybe not fairly, but just enough to keep you going. And if you don't, that's when the friction appears. Not always as punishment, but as resistance. Things get harder to navigate. People start questioning your choices. You feel out of sync, like you've stepped off a moving walkway and now you're walking against the current. It's not that you can't move forward. It just takes more awareness, more intention. Because now you're not just moving through the system, you're seeing it. And once you see it, the illusion starts to crack. You notice how many rules are followed simply because they've always been there. How many processes exist without being reevaluated. How often people defend structures they don't even benefit from, just because it feels safer than stepping outside them. That's the key. Safety, or at least the idea of it. Blind obedience creates stability, not necessarily progress, not necessarily fairness, but stability. It keeps things predictable. It reduces uncertainty. And for most people, that's enough. They'd rather stay within a system that feels secure than step into something unknown, even if that unknown holds more truth. So they follow. They follow instructions they don't fully believe in. They accept limits they've never tested. They repeat behaviors that don't align with what they actually want. And over time, it stops feeling like a choice. It just feels like reality. But it's not. It's a pattern, a loop that continues because it's rarely interrupted. Because most people don't stop long enough to ask, does this actually make sense for me? They assume it does, because everyone else is doing it. Because questioning it feels risky. Because stepping outside it means taking responsibility for your own direction. And responsibility, that's heavy. It removes the safety net of blame. It takes away the comfort of saying that's just how things are. It forces you to decide, to act, to stand by choices that aren't pre-approved. That's why blind obedience is so effective. It keeps responsibility low and compliance high. But the moment you stop obeying blindly, when you start observing, questioning, choosing with intention, the dynamic changes. You're no longer just a part of the system. You're interacting with it consciously. And that changes everything. You begin to see where you actually have control and where you've been giving it away without realizing it. You notice which rules are necessary and which ones are just habits dressed up as authority. You stop reacting automatically and start responding deliberately. And suddenly the system doesn't feel as absolute as it once did. It feels flexible. Not because it changed overnight, but because your relationship to it did. You're no longer moving through it on autopilot, guided by invisible expectations and inherited beliefs. You're awake to it, aware of it, choosing when to follow and when to step aside. And that awareness breaks the one thing the system quietly relies on most: your willingness to go along with it without ever asking why. There's a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable, where everything shifts. Not outside. Nothing dramatic happens. The world doesn't stop. People don't suddenly change. The system keeps moving exactly as it always has. But inside, something clicks. Realization. A clarity you didn't have before. And once it's there, it doesn't leave. You start to see patterns where you once saw normal. Behaviors that used to feel natural now look rehearsed. Conversations sound different. Reactions feel predictable in a way that almost makes you pause mid-thought. It's like you've been watching a performance your whole life, and suddenly you can see the script. Not word for word, but enough to know it's there. And that changes how everything feels. You notice how people respond not from truth, but from habit. How decisions are often guided by expectation rather than intention. How so much of what once seemed real is actually repetition. Inherited ways of thinking, passed down, reinforced, rarely questioned. At first, it's fascinating. You feel like you've uncovered something hidden. Like you're seeing through layers that most people don't even realize exist. There's a sense of awareness, almost like waking up from something you didn't know you were in. But then, it gets heavier. Because awareness doesn't just show you the world differently. It shows you yourself. You begin to recognize the moments where you followed without thinking. The times you held back, adjusted, stayed quiet, not because it felt right, but because it felt expected. You see how many of your choices were shaped by invisible pressures you never agreed to but still obeyed. And that realization, it lingers. Not in a loud, overwhelming way, but in a constant, quiet presence. Like a voice that doesn't speak but makes itself known every time you're about to fall back into old patterns. You can feel it. That split second where you know you're about to repeat something that no longer fits. A reaction that used to be automatic now feels forced. A decision that once felt easy now carries weight. Because now you're aware of it. Now you can see the mechanism behind it. And that's the point of no return. Because going back would mean pretending you don't see it. And pretending takes effort. More effort than simply facing what you've already understood. You can try, of course. You can slip back into familiar roles, repeat old behaviors, follow the same paths that once felt comfortable. And from the outside, it might even look the same. People might respond the same way, the environment might feel familiar again. But inside, it won't feel right. There will always be that quiet resistance. That sense that you're acting, not being. That you're choosing comfort over clarity. And once you've experienced clarity, even briefly, comfort starts to feel like confinement. That's the shift. You don't reject the old patterns because someone told you to. You don't walk away from them out of rebellion or force. You move away from them because they no longer make sense in the way they used to. They don't align. And alignment, once you feel it, becomes non-negotiable. It doesn't mean everything becomes clear overnight. It doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers or that every step forward is easy. In fact, it often becomes more uncertain, more complex, because now you're navigating without the old script. But it's real. Every decision carries intention. Every action reflects awareness. Even the mistakes feel different, not like failures, but like part of something you're actively shaping instead of passively repeating. And that changes how you move. You stop looking for permission in places that used to define you. You stop waiting for confirmation before taking a step. You begin to trust something internal, something that doesn't rely on patterns or expectations. It's quieter than the noise you left behind, but it's stronger because it's yours. And once you've felt that, once you've seen through the layers, recognized the patterns, understood the structure behind what once felt automatic, there's no real way to return to not knowing. You can pause. You can hesitate. You can even wish, sometimes, that things felt simpler again. But deep down, you know too much now.